My brother didn't even look at me when he said it. She has no idea what she's doing with that money. She never did. He adjusted his cufflinks like he was getting ready for a photo shoot, not a mediation hearing. The conference room on the 14th floor of Hartwell and Associates smelled like old leather and new lies. My uncle sat at the head of the table. My aunt dabbed the corner of her eye with a monogrammed handkerchief. 3 cousins I hadn't spoken to in 2 years were arranged along the far wall like decorative furniture, all of them watching me the way people watch a car that's about to crash. I checked my phone under the table. 9:04 a.m. He had exactly 11 minutes before everything he thought he owned stopped being his. Have you ever sat in a room full of people who love someone who has been slowly stealing from you? Drop a yes in the comments. I want to know how many of us have had to smile through that particular kind of quiet devastation. My brother, I'll call him Marcus, had been the golden child for as long as I could remember. Older by 6 years. Louder by 1,000 decibels. Our father had built a modest regional logistics company from nothing over 30 years. And when he died 18 months ago, he left it to both of us equally, 50-50. It was written clearly in the will, reviewed by 2 attorneys, filed with the probate court without a single objection. Marcus objected now. He objected constantly, loudly, and through every legal channel available to a man who had spent the last year and a half quietly bleeding the company dry while I watched. Nadia doesn't understand the operational side, Marcus said, spreading his hands like he was explaining something to a child. He was looking at Richard Hartwell, the mediator, not at me. He had not looked at me directly since I walked in. She has a background in graphic design. She has never managed logistics, never handled vendor contracts, never negotiated freight rates. Dad brought her onto the board as a courtesy, a family gesture. It was never meant to be a real ownership stake. I let him talk. The mediator, Richard, was a 60-something man with reading glasses perched at the end of his nose and the expression of someone who had heard every version of this exact argument for 30 years. He was writing something on his legal pad. I couldn't see what. My cousin shifted in his chair. My aunt sniffled again. Marcus leaned forward. I'm asking the board to formally recognize that Nadia's stake be reclassified as a silent interest. No voting rights. A fixed annual distribution. She gets her money. She stays out of operations. Everyone wins. He smiled at me then. Just for a second. It was the smile of someone who thought they had already won. I had seen that smile my entire life. At the dinner table when he told our father I had crashed his car. I hadn't. He had. But he was 17 and faster with a story. At my college graduation, when he told everyone I had only gotten into the design program because the school needed diversity numbers. At the reading of our father's will when he leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." That was the moment I started taking notes. Not metaphorical notes, actual notes. A secured, encrypted document that I had been updating every week for 14 months. Dates, amounts, discrepancies between what Marcus reported to the board and what the actual vendor invoices showed. I had a background in graphic design, yes, but I had also spent 18 months teaching myself forensic accounting from YouTube tutorials, library books, and a very patient CPA named Denise, who charged me $175 an hour and was worth every cent. Marcus thought I was grieving and distracted. I was grieving and building a case. Nadia. Richard, the mediator, looked at me over his glasses. Your brother has submitted a formal proposal to restructure the ownership agreement. You had 2 weeks to review the documentation. Do you have a response? Marcus uncapped his pen. He was ready to watch me flounder. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. He had our father's jawline and absolutely none of his integrity. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent, which, for the record, was modest by choice, not by necessity. While Marcus had been expensing $4,000 dinners to the company account and leasing a BMW through the business, I had been quiet, small, easy to overlook. That was the plan. Yes, I said. I have a response. I reached into my bag and placed a single dark green folder on the table. I didn't open it yet, but first, I said, I'd like Marcus to explain the Delwood account. The pen stopped moving. Marcus recovered quickly. He was good at that. The Delwood account is a vendor relationship I've been developing for 8 months. It's still in the early stages. It's been invoiced 14 times, I said, for a combined total of $340,000 in freight consulting fees. I pulled every bill of lading for the routes Delwood supposedly managed. I paused. There are no bills of lading because Delwood Logistics Consulting LLC has no trucks, no warehouse, no operating address, and no employees. It was incorporated 11 months ago in Delaware using a registered agent service and a P.O. box. The room was very quiet. It was incorporated, I continued, sliding the first page out of the green folder and placing it in front of Richard, by someone using the name Michael D. Warren, which is our father's middle name and Marcus's college roommate's last name. Marcus stood up. That is completely. There's more, I said. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't moved quickly. I spoke the way a person speaks when they have already won, and they know it, and there is no rush whatsoever. The invoices were approved by Marcus in his capacity as acting CEO. The payments were wired from the operating account to a Delwood account at a regional bank in South Carolina. From there, in increments of under $10,000, to avoid triggering federal reporting thresholds, a practice called structuring, which is itself a federal crime. The funds were moved to a personal account. I looked at my aunt. She had stopped dabbing her eye. I looked at my cousins. They were not whispering anymore. A personal account, I said, held in the name of Marcus's girlfriend, who, in addition to being his girlfriend, is also the sole officer of Delwood Logistics Consulting LLC. Marcus was still standing. He looked like a man who had stepped onto what he thought was solid ground and found open water. His lawyer, a youngish man named Patrick who had been furiously taking notes, leaned over and whispered something. Marcus shook his head tightly. She fabricated this, Marcus said. His voice had gone flat. She has no idea how to read financial records. She's been working with someone to build a false narrative because she wants to push me out of the company our father built. It was a good pivot. I had expected it. In fact, I had prepared for it 3 months ago when I first realized he would say almost exactly that. You're right that I worked with someone, I said. I reached back into my bag and placed a second document in front of Richard. I retained a forensic accounting firm, Kessel and Morin, based in Chicago. They have performed independent audits for the IRS, the SEC, and the Department of Justice. Their lead analyst reviewed 14 months of company financials. Their report is 68 pages. That's the executive summary. Richard picked it up. He read the first page. He turned to the second. His expression, which had been carefully neutral since the moment I walked in, shifted into something I could only describe as a man recalculating everything he thought this meeting was going to be. Marcus sat back down. I let the silence sit. This is the part I want to explain, because a lot of people ask this. If you discover someone stealing from you, why not stop them immediately? Why not freeze the accounts, file a police report, change the passwords? Because at $50,000, it's a civil dispute. A family disagreement. Lawyers argue for 2 years. Marcus claims it was authorized spending. A judge orders him to repay a fraction of it. And he's back in the CEO chair within 18 months with a grudge and a much better understanding of where the cameras are. I needed him to steal enough that it crossed from a business dispute into criminal wire fraud territory. I needed the pattern to be undeniable. I needed the Delwood invoices to stack up, month after month, into an amount that no judge would call a bookkeeping error. So I watched. I documented. I let the number climb. I disabled my automatic approval alerts on the operating account and told our bookkeeper, Linda, who I trusted completely and brought into the plan 4 months in, to flag every Delwood transaction internally but process them without triggering the board notification system. Every payment that went out, I was logging in real time on my end. Marcus thought my silence was ignorance. My silence was a trap. I looked at my brother across the conference table. He was whispering furiously to Patrick. Patrick did not look like he was offering reassurance. He looked like a man who was mentally calculating how quickly he could withdraw from a case. The total, I said, across all Delwood invoices, plus 3 additional vendors our forensic team flagged as having similar patterns, is $412,000, all of it drawn from company operating funds, all of it approved by Marcus, all of it wired through accounts with traceable connections to either Marcus directly or to individuals in his immediate personal circle. My uncle, who had not said a single word since the meeting began, cleared his throat. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the table. There's one more thing, I said. I pulled the last document from the green folder. 3 weeks ago, I was approached by a private equity firm interested in acquiring a minority stake in the company. The valuation they came back with was $8.4 million. I placed the term sheet on the table. That offer is contingent on clean financials and stable governance. It expires in 30 days. I looked at Richard. If Marcus's restructuring proposal goes forward and I am reclassified as a silent interest holder, I lose my ability to approve or block transactions of this size. Marcus would have unilateral authority to accept or reject the offer. Given what we now know about how he handles financial authority, I think we can all agree that would be inadvisable. The room had a particular kind of silence in it. Not the silence of shock, though there was some of that. It was the silence of people recalibrating, of my aunt sitting very still with her handkerchief folded in her lap, reconsidering every conversation she'd had with Marcus over the past year, of my cousin staring at the table, of my uncle looking at Marcus the way you look at someone when you realize you never actually knew them. Marcus tried one more time. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sheet of paper. He slid it across the table to Richard with the confidence of a man playing his last card and knowing it. She signed a management authority delegation 6 months after Dad died, Marcus said. His voice was steadier now, rehearsed. She was overwhelmed by the grief. She told me herself she couldn't handle the operational decisions. She delegated full operational signing authority to me. Everything I did was within the scope of that delegation. The Delwood invoices were vendor payments under my authorized management. It was legal. Richard looked at the document. He looked at me. My cousins looked at me. My aunt looked at me. I recognized the document. I had signed it. Marcus had brought it to me 8 weeks after the funeral, tucked inside a folder of HR paperwork and insurance forms that needed signatures to keep the company running. I had been sleeping 4 hours a night and eating cereal for dinner. I signed it without reading it. That was the mistake that started all of this. For one moment, I let myself feel it. The specific horror of realizing that your grief was weaponized, that the person who sat next to you at your father's funeral and held your hand during the eulogy had come home that same week and typed up the document that would eventually be used to justify stealing from you. Then I let it go. Because I had known about the delegation document for 9 months, and I had prepared. That delegation, I said, covers operational decisions, vendor contracts under $50,000, routine payroll and facilities expenses. I looked at Marcus. It does not cover the creation of new vendor relationships exceeding $100,000 without board approval. It does not cover approving invoices from entities with undisclosed conflicts of interest, specifically, entities controlled by someone in a personal relationship with the signatory. And it absolutely does not cover structuring payments to avoid federal reporting thresholds, which is a criminal act regardless of any internal delegation document. I turned back to Richard. The delegation document doesn't protect him. It actually tightens the case because it shows he was aware of the approval limits and deliberately structured the invoices and payments to stay just under the thresholds that would have required my sign-off. Patrick, the young lawyer, closed his notebook. That was when I knew it was over. But I had one more thing to say. Not for the record. Not for the mediator. For Marcus. I want you to understand something, I said. I kept my voice low and even. Not cold. Not angry. Just clear. Dad built this company by waking up at 5 a.m. for 30 years and being honest with every single person he did business with. He left it to both of us because he believed you had some of that in you. I gave you 14 months to prove him right. You spent 14 months proving him wrong. Marcus's jaw tightened. I've been in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District since last month, I said. The forensic report was submitted to them 2 weeks ago. The referral for investigation was formally accepted last Thursday. I folded my hands on the table. This mediation was your last opportunity to get ahead of this before it became a federal matter. I wanted you to have that chance. Partly because you're my brother, and partly because I wanted to look you in the eye when you realized you had spent a year underestimating me. The door to the conference room opened. 2 men in dark jackets walked in. One of them asked for Marcus by full name. Marcus looked at me. I don't know what he was looking for. Remorse maybe, or doubt. Some sign that this was a bluff, a negotiating tactic, something he could still talk his way out of. I gave him nothing. Not because I was cold. Because I had already grieved this. I had grieved it in my apartment at 2 a.m., bent over spreadsheets with cold coffee and my father's reading glasses on, the ones I had taken from his desk after the funeral, because I couldn't stand the idea of them sitting there unused. I had cried then. I had been furious then. I had gone through every version of this that involved screaming and confrontation and saying all the things I had wanted to say for 30 years. By the time I walked into that conference room, I was done. I was clean. I was just a woman with a green folder and 11 months of receipts. They walked Marcus out. Patrick gathered his things in silence. My aunt sat without moving for a long time. One of my cousins, the youngest, who I had always secretly liked best, looked at me and said quietly, "I had no idea." "I know," I said. "That's okay." My uncle asked if I needed anything. I told him I was fine. I told him the company was going to be fine. I had already spoken to the private equity firm that morning and told them there would be some governance changes in the near term, but the underlying business was solid. They said they were still interested. We had scheduled a follow-up call for the following week. I stayed in the conference room after everyone left. I sat there for a few minutes with the green folder closed in front of me. Outside the window, the city was doing what cities do, indifferent and continuous, everyone moving through their own private version of something enormous. My father used to say that the most dangerous thing you could do in business was confuse someone's patience for weakness. He said a lot of people had made that mistake with him over the years, and every single one of them eventually understood the difference. I thought about that a lot during those 14 months. On the days when Marcus called me to check in, voice warm and easy, asking how I was holding up, whether I needed help understanding the quarterly reports, whether I had considered that maybe a silent role would actually be better for me given everything I was going through. I thought about my father on every one of those days, and I stayed quiet, and I went home and updated the document. The investigation took 7 months. Marcus's attorney negotiated a plea. He was convicted on 4 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of financial structuring. He was sentenced to 38 months in federal prison. The company closed the private equity deal 4 months after the mediation. The minority stake sale funded a full operational audit, 3 new regional contracts, and the promotion of Linda, my bookkeeper, my quiet partner in all of this, to Chief Financial Officer. I changed the nameplate on the CEO's office the week Marcus was sentenced, not to put my name on it. My father's name was on it, and I left it there. I just moved it from the door he had been using to the one I work behind. He taught me that business is built slowly, honestly, and with the understanding that the people around you are always watching, even when, especially when, you think they aren't. I was always watching. And patience, real patience, is not the same thing as doing nothing. It is doing everything quietly until the moment arrives when quiet is no longer necessary. That moment came on a Tuesday morning on the 14th floor. With a green folder and a forensic accounting report, and a brother who had spent a year and a half betting that I would never figure it out. He was wrong. And now you know exactly what I did with everything he underestimated.